Hey there guys and welcome. So Greece is a place I've wanted to recreate in city skylines for a long time. The beautiful architecture and the nature directly surrounding some of the towns on the island is, we don't see it anywhere else in the world. And I'm really happy to be going back to some pretty unique custom building with this little town we're visiting here, and that little town we're going to take inspiration from is called Ia, and that is a town on the island of Santorini. And so far in the series I've learnt something new, or really tried to challenge myself in a different way with every place we've visited. So with Italy I learnt how to work with extreme heights. With Spain, we had some really nice nature and some massive cliffs that was sort of a huge part of the aesthetics of the overall city. And then in the UK where we've been lately, I've been working with imperfections and sort of seeing what that adds to a city character wise. So I feel like this build here in Greece is finally going to put all of those things we learned together into the one place. And to be honest, I really have no choice because this place is insane. The architecture, the building, this is unlike anything that I've ever built in city skylines, and this is truly going to challenge me on every level. So I'm ready for it. I hope you guys are. I've already sort of started on this. I've been doing it for a few weeks, so I'm a little bit ahead. I'm excited to show you guys what I've built so far. It's awesome to work in. You get this amazing vibe, and yeah, let's get going. Rather than build a whole new map, we're building on the other side of the same map that we built the UK in. It's called Midsummer 6, and the reason I've done this is because this is really only going to be a little wee town in comparison to maybe a whole map, and I didn't want to waste a whole bunch of time detailing an entire map where we're not going to see sort of 90% of it. So I figured just sort of focusing on one corner of the map and making it as detailed as I could would be the way to go. I've also chosen not to make an island here like the real Santorini. We're just going to make a really steep looking peninsula here that's going to closely match the terrain we'd see there. And in real life the island's that big, I don't really think we're going to notice that this isn't a real island, so anyway, I want to make this terrain as accurate as I possibly can, and that meant doing a little bit of research. And after doing that, the area is like super volcanic. We've had some pretty major eruptions here over the last say 20 to 25,000 years, and you only need to have a really quick scan at the local hills to see all the different layers of ash that have been dropped over the years. So we see a lot of reddy, like purpley type rock in this area. We also see lots of really dark rock. There's quite a few different colours around here. Obviously there's lots of limestone as well, which is quite white, and this is all obviously attributed to the area being super volcanic. I don't know if it's that important for me to know all of this, but I think it certainly helps with the building. It definitely inspires me, at the very least, to try and make this as realistic as I can. And this particular cliff here is going to be in view a lot of the time. We're going to have our little town sit pretty much on top of this, so you can see I've tried to use the rock and cliff props on the areas of the cliff where it's really steep, and then in the valleys between I've put grass and tried to slope it more evenly down towards the sea. This is the sort of erosion that we see heaps in this area, and a lot of it's due to earthquakes, and of course all of that ash is pretty unstable, and I'm pretty happy with how it comes out. I've got to say, it looks pretty natural. So let's move over to the other side of the hill now. It's a little bit less steep over here, and we see some really unique terrain over here as well. A lot of this area looks like it was really old farmland, and maybe it's still being used in that manner somehow. Some of the paddocks certainly look pretty unused, but in any case it was quite mesmerizing looking at this on Google Earth. These paddocks sort of were terraced down the hillside, and they sort of looked like they were flowing down the hill like water. It was really beautiful, I thought. And I ended up recreating this in-game about 3 times because I was just never happy with how it looked, but in the end I used the mining walls from $2.20's Osara series to make those retaining walls around the paddocks. I am just amazed at how many brilliant buildings are on the Steam Workshop, of pretty much every genre you could be possibly after. I was skeptical whether there would be any Greek sort of style buildings at all, and to my surprise there was quite a few, and really high quality ones as well. It's just amazing that these are available at the click of a button. So I lay out all of the buildings here that I've got just very quickly, and then I run one road in that follows the one we see in real life. It's kind of curvy as it comes in, and then I want to put all the pedestrian paths in because these are pretty much as prominent as the roads around this part. And in fact, the real life city that we're taking inspiration from here, its main street is pedestrian only. So I kind of figured that these paths are going to be built around in pretty much every way possible, so they need to go in first. You can also see that I've got a little wee road coming off here into a sort of dead end roundabout, and this is where I plan on putting the service point for a lot of our buildings that we're going to have out on that cliff face. And this little wee cul-de-sac means that those vehicles can come in, quickly drop off goods or do what they need to do, and then quickly go again. So next I'll spend a lot of time putting in these buildings, and I did it off camera because it was pretty boring, and you're gonna see me work with the area pretty extensively, so you won't really miss out on too much. But what I've done here is I've placed all of these buildings in a very loose sort of a grid pattern. They're all facing pretty much the same direction, and there's no roads running between them. They fill in the inside of this block. I plan on putting pedestrian paths and various spots for parking and things like that around, and I would consider this probably some of the more easy building that we're going to do in this city or this town, so hence why I've started with this area. And when I say easy, I guess what I mean is, like I mentioned, there's a bit of a grid pattern here. It's pretty flat compared to where we're going to go, and you know, you can sort of compare this to many cities that we would see in other places of the world, at least with the way that these buildings are laid out. I guess it starts to get a little bit more unique with these pedestrian path only areas, but starting with this part of the town here on this sort of main road also means that I can get a few services in early, and I'm actually going to turn off a lot of the mods I normally would, like no notifications and things like that, and really make an effort to run this city properly and address all the services and stuff. So on the Steam Workshop I found a little Greek police station, a little Greek medical clinic, and all of the other little services that I need, which is super cool. So at this stage of the build here, I've got all of the buildings in and the pedestrian paths are in as well, and now it's about just sort of making use of the space in between. And this is where things got really tricky for me. Like, a lot of the areas are sort of very bespoke, for a lack of a better term. They look like they could almost be impossible to recreate, and a good example of that is the plastered or rendered walls. They sort of make it look like a lot of these buildings just flow into each other, like they've all been plastered together, which is a very unique look. And in the beginning I just had absolutely no idea where to begin to try and recreate that look. I really just sort of had to start with the things that I thought would look good, and then if they did, sort of go from there, and if they didn't, then I'd have to go back to the drawing board and start again. And I would say the two most prominent things I noticed were, one, those white plastered walls, and two, they've got these really unique steps and stairs everywhere. They sort of look like just big slabs of broken concrete, and a lot of them have been painted with white paint around the edge or like a grey paint around the edge. So if I could sort of match those two things, see how that looks, and then go from there, then I can start looking a little bit closer at what makes this place unique and start adding that sort of stuff in as well. So at the moment you are going to see me painstakingly do all of this by hand, but I currently have an asset creator making me some very cool things for the series, so as soon as they're ready to be released I will let you guys know, and I'm sure they're going to help us really capture that vibe that we're after. Even after placing down just a few of these white plastered walls around the place, it's really starting to look unique. Greece is a place that I've wanted to go to for quite a while now, and I guess the only thing that's really put me off is it's quite pricey, and there's also quite a lot of tourists from what I've heard, like a huge amount of them, like off-putting amount. But that's why I love this game, because even if we get 10% of the vibe of the real life Greece, that's enough for me, man, especially considering we're playing a video game. And I think if I stay as true as I possibly can to the elements that make these places very unique, so in this case it's plastered walls and unique steps, at least at this stage, I think it definitely helps that overall picture and the authenticity of these places. The island of Santorini is actually a big caldera, which is basically a dormant volcano, and because of that there's a lot of earthquakes in the area here. The last major one here was in 1956, and it pretty much flattened the little town that we're taking inspiration from, Ia. And this has actually happened many times over. In fact, one of the oldest civilizations was in this area, and there's still remnants of it. They believe it's between 3,500 and 4,000 BC old, which is just crazy old. And that old city met its demise through a really bad eruption in about 2000 BC, which basically the whole caldera just fell into a magma chamber directly underneath the island, and the resulting volcanic explosion and eruption left up to 600 meters of ash on the island, just completely burying any signs of civilization and the 15,000 people that live there. So these guys have obviously had to rebuild their city and town over and over, and what that means is they've used a lot of natural materials that they've sourced locally, and these buildings obviously need to be easy to repair, and having generations under your belt of rebuilding over and over would sort of refine the process a little bit, you know, like you wouldn't want unsustainable materials being used in any of the building process, because eventually they're going to end up in the earth. History will tell us that these guys are pretty much rebuilding every 100 years after a major earthquake, and using local and natural materials to maintain and build these buildings means that nothing bad goes back into the earth if they have to rebuild, and the new building materials are sourced very easily and very quickly. So with all of that in mind, what you're going to see me do here is really show some age. I want to introduce some buildings that they maybe haven't got around to repairing just yet. They could also be like maybe historical ruins, but I've decided to put them right here by our pedestrian main street because I want them to be a little bit of a tourist attraction. And you can clearly see our main street here now. I've got some network plastered fences running up either side of it, which is another thing we see a lot of in Europe, especially up these sort of pedestrian paths. And then I really want to try and squeeze as many of these buildings as close together as we can. In real life we see these pockets of very dense buildings, wall to wall buildings, and a lot of them are sort of around those high traffic areas like this main street here. So these little wee plastered walls that we've put in either side of the main street here, they sort of create these little wee walled off front areas in these restaurants and cafes. There's a really neat little gateway that you can go through to some of these places, and then it's just a casual dining area once you're in there. So I'm going to look to add a couple of those, and then it's about just adding some props to the area that we've built, really. Things like little wee flowers and trees. There's these like shade tarps that are hanging around a lot of the place over restaurant tables and stuff. We're also going to look to add some imperfections with decals and some grungy decals on the sides of some of these buildings. And I also noticed on Google Earth that they have some of these very unique car parks that come in on top of some of these buildings. A lot of these buildings are parapet or flat roofed buildings, and because we're starting to work up a slope here, I'm going to introduce some of those car parks on top of the buildings as well. In the next episode, we start building some of the really extreme parts of the town going down the cliff face. The building is absolutely insane. You guys have to see it to believe it. So I hope that I see you there, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode as well. If you have, hit that thumbs up and stick around because I've got more. Take it easy, guys. Look after yourselves and look after each other. I'll see you later.